the Walter Clore Wine and Culinary Center in Prosser, Washington. It's one of my favorite places, and I hope you'll visit. You know, during the 1920s, electric power really came online, and all kinds of new electrical appliances came out. Toasters and radios and electric lights in your home and vacuum cleaners, and everyone wanted electric power. The Puget Sound Power and Light Company came to this location on the Baker River and built the Lower Baker River Dam. It's one of the biggest power producers in our state of Washington. But it wasn't easy to build. They had all kinds of flooding problems, insurance problems, corporate problems. My dad worked here in the 1920s along with my uncle, and they were young guys looking for work, but they didn't stay long because they were worried about how many people were getting injured on the job. That's when the Wobblies appeared, the Industrial Workers of the World, one of our state's first major unions. They shut down work here on 2 occasions and made sure that industrial accidents went to the top of the agenda to be solved. It was dangerous work and people did get injured. But the dam was completed, and today all kinds of people in Western Washington enjoy the power from this source. This is the Lower Baker River Dam right here in the Baker River in the North Cascades. It's an incredible source of power for all of us and truly is one of my favorite places.
Senate. This is first anniversary of the Trump administration's inauguration, and I guess I've been reflecting about how wrong I was a year ago. I was telling you, we're just going to do our business and focus on our work and be able to ignore everything that's going on in D.C. And unfortunately, that is not the world that we're living in. We have had ongoing onslaught of assaults on our people, on our budget, on institutions in our state. And so, we have retooled, and with the help of a great attorney general, are fighting back in every way that we can figure out how to do that. We will likely be moving out of the Rules Committee tomorrow, the mask bill of Senator Valdez, and expect that we will be considering that in the Senate a week from tomorrow. Tomorrow is our first day of floor action, but in addition to worrying about all of the issues that we have here, we just have our hands full trying to do everything that we can to protect the people of Washington from really hostile, malevolent federal government right now. And I guess the only consolation is we're not Greenland or Venezuela. So that's life here in the first week of the Senate. Otherwise, everything's going smoothly. Look forward to the conversation today.
Thanks, Senator Peterson. I'm Lori Jenkins, Speaker of the House. I'm here with Joe Fitzgibbon, our Majority Leader, and Monica Stonier, our Floor Leader today.
Now it was my turn to forget Senator Dingler to introduce, but
I think whoever goes first just forgets to introduce everybody else. That's the way it is. We had, I think, a productive first week of session last week. Senator Peterson mentioned today is the one-year anniversary of President Trump being inaugurated, and I think, for us, also, we're really focused on trying to put a stop to or stopping the harm that's being done to Washingtonians from Trump administration policies and bills that have been passed, and then making progress where we can on the positive things that Washington has done for the people who live here. So stopping the bad, moving the good things forward. We started our floor action last Thursday, moved bills off of the floor, all of them bipartisan. So those were bills that were already in rules. So we're up and going, and I think you'll see floor action this Thursday too. We heard a number of bills in committee last week. Senator Peterson already mentioned one of them. We also heard the masking bill in our committee. We heard the AI companion chatbots bill also, and we heard in healthcare the bill on preserving access to preventative services, and really that's the Washington Health Alliance bill that's governor request that will likely be, I think, moving later this week out of committee. So this week we have a number of bills that we're hearing. Representative Hill's bill on land banking, which will definitely help on housing. It is some work we're doing on housing issues. The regulation of flock cameras, Rep. Salahuddin's bill, and regulating large energy use facilities, which is Rep. Dolio's bill, which we'll hear this week. So we're excited to keep on pressing forward and continue to try to do everything that we can to stop harm coming from the other Washington. I think we're open for questions.
This morning, the Senate Law and Justice Committee held a hearing on the flock camera bill. Do you anticipate as swift action in the House on the companion bill, kind of pushing that through on a similar timeline as the masking bill for law enforcement?
My guess is that I think Rep. Salahuddin and Senator Trudeau have worked very closely together. I think probably the Senate bill is the mover here. We'll keep on looking at Senator Dingler about this. But we want to hear them just to make sure that if there's any problems that arise anywhere, that these bills can stay alive, keep moving. The other thing is that in a short session for important bills like the masking bill and the camera bill, it's important for both bodies to have a pretty strong exposure to the issues around them and understand them, because we don't have much time once they switch houses.
And I'll just add, the Senate bill is supposed to be the mover. So Senator Trudeau and I have been working on it for the last 6 months. Senator Holy has been an excellent partner, and that's what I love, that it is a bipartisan bill in the Senate. And I think the testimony today and the statements made by both Senator Trudeau and Senator Holy really described that, this is something we need. It is about making sure we don't create a police state, that we have sensible regulations in place. We are one of the few states that don't have any regulations around these cameras. So I do expect that we will probably move this out of committee in the next week or two.
It sounds like there is a draft of the income tax bill circulating. Do you have a copy to share with us here?
We don't have a bill yet. The piece that we are seeking technical feedback about is the mechanics of the tax. So, for example, we want to be sure that pass-through businesses, the owners of pass-through businesses, don't pay double tax, right? B&O tax on their gross income from services, for example, and then also have to pay the millionaire tax on top of that. So we're We have accountants and lawyers and businesses and a bunch of people looking at that to help us make sure that we get the mechanics exactly right. We have not yet settled on the tax offsets. So Representative Fitzgibbon and I are in discussions about that. But we're hoping within about a week, little week and a half, we'll have a final bill that will be ready for introduction and for everybody to start the process of looking at.
So there is not a complete bill in draft form at
There
this
is
point?
not.
This is like a component of it that you basically.
This is the mechanics of the tax, yeah.
And when you say tax offsets, you're talking about how the revenue would be used to offset other tax burdens, or are you just?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So the governor, has proposed using part of it for working families tax credit and part of it for small business tax credit. We have other ideas that we've talked about, whether that's certain sales tax items or property tax reductions. So all of those things are in the mix, and I think both caucuses are in the process of having conversations so we can figure out how to be as aligned as possible when we introduce a draft.
On the mask bill, do we have any idea how agencies would, or would they, follow that? Can someone with some good legal background explain how a federal agency may not want to follow that state law?
It does appear that there are federal agencies that may not want to follow the state law. If you notice on the Senate version, there's a private right of action for those individuals. And that is part of that enforcement mechanism, because that is a challenge. And I think once people understand that this is a law of the state of Washington, they're going to have to pay more attention, because under the current version, they can be privately sued.
It is very unusual in a democratic society for law enforcement officers to cover their faces. It's one of the things that differentiates us from Russia or Venezuela, is that law enforcement officers are accountable to the public, and that they don't cover their faces and engage in, as Senator Gingras said, police state type tactics. We have a lot of anxiety about the direction that some federal law enforcement agencies are headed in seeking to cover their faces. And I think this is part of how we keep ourselves from looking more like Russia than we do today.
And I just want to add, and I think the exec session on this bill made it very, very clear, that our Washington state law enforcement are not engaging in this behavior. They are following the law of the land. And Senator Holy actually had called up the CJTC to find out if there had been any complaints about Washington state agencies with masking, and there aren't any. This is the federal government's overreach, and we expect any law enforcement officer in the state of Washington to follow the rules and the laws of the state of Washington.
Over the weekend in Vancouver, there were Instagram posts from our local law enforcement demonstrating how community members can identify a Vancouver police officer, a Camas police officer. They were pointing out their badges, the logo they wear on their hats, as a way to reinforce what law enforcement has been telling me at home, which is that the trust that the public should have, that they can call their local police when in trouble in a domestic violence situation, when crime is happening, is a concern that they have. And that erosion of that trust means that fewer people are going to call for help when they need it. So our local law enforcement folks have to work overtime to keep communicating to the public who they are, how they engage, and that they are not the same entity as ICE. And so I would much rather those law enforcement officers be spending their time doing other things than reiterating who they are, separate from the federal immigration agents.
I have a quick follow-up to that. Assuming the mask bill goes through and is passed, are any of you also willing then to call out the folks that are doxing these ICE officers and following them to their children's schools and all that kind of a thing? Are you willing to condemn some of the folks, like those ones in Minnesota, that have said this is how to report when you see ICE?
Yeah, I would say it's absolutely the case that there ought to be formal legal process that gets followed to make sure that there's accountability for the officers. You know, in the same way that we don't want random citizens out investigating daycare centers. We want the process to be followed with the legally established enforcement mechanisms taking care to make sure that the law is followed.
I was asking about the doxing, though. Are you willing to call out those that are?
Yeah, absolutely.
Public.
That's what I'm saying. The private posse sort of approach to law enforcement is the wrong approach. It ought not to be private citizens trying to take the law into their own hands. When we have a law, we expect that the government will be the one enforcing it.
Last week, WSU, Washington State University, unveiled some of their legislative priorities, and they're asking for money, $4.7 million, to help fund their collective bargaining agreements with their student workers unions. Funding last year was left out of last year's biennium budget. So I guess my question is, is this something that, I know it's like really specific, but is this something that you guys, I guess, support, or your caucuses are supporting, or you're following at all?
It has generally been a priority for us in our budgeting process to fund agreements that were negotiated in good faith by the state or state agencies with their workforce. There are some of the collective bargaining agreements that came in too late for us to fund them last year. I'm not immediately familiar with this WSU contract, but we can't uniformly say that will happen, but we are doing the best we can with the resources we have to make sure that all state agencies, including WSU, can retain their workforce.
So last week there was a rally here to reform the Keeping Families Together Act, and critics have said that this act allows children to stay in potentially dangerous homes until it's too late. Representative Couture has introduced a bill that has Democratic co-sponsors that would change the removal standard from imminent physical harm to imminent or serious physical harm, so lowering the bar for removal. I'm just wondering where leadership stands on that, and what do you think the prospects are for that bill or other efforts on that front to reform that act?
I think Rep. Ortiz Self, who was the prime sponsor of the Keeping Families Together bill, has actually been working to try and address the issues that DCYF has identified. And what DCYF has said is that the most significant issues that place children at risk, as far as they've been able to see, is that they have critical incidents at the time of a shelter care, when after that parents either refuse to engage in services or refuse visits. So she has a bill, I can't remember the bill numbers, but that actually talks about during that shelter care proceeding explicitly authorizing the court to order services and for DCYF to go back in for removal if parents refuse to engage. And so that's an effort to get at those critical incidents. The other thing is, it was a couple of years ago when we passed the bill making it clear to courts that and judges that they could take into account access and presence of dangerous drugs in the house when making a decision. What we saw in the last quarter of DCYF data is that their number of critical incidents has fallen by over 60%. And so we want to see what the fourth quarter data shows from 2025 to see if this was an exceptional circumstance, or I think the thinking is that once the courts really got up and working on that bill, based on that bill, that more removals happened and that critical incidents did in fact decrease. So I think we share the same concern probably with Rep. Couture. I think we all share the same concern about how to protect kids. We may just need to continue to work on what's the best way to do that and focus in on the details.
Senator Peterson, last week you mentioned the cigarette tax might be increased. Is that still on your list? Any other revenue that's being looked at for this current budget cycle from either?
Yeah, so Senator Robinson, I think, introduced a bill that would increase tobacco taxes. We had our first hearings of bills yesterday in Ways and Means and considered some tax proposals, including one that the governor had for closing what has become a loophole. We're early in the process right now, and so I think we're going to continue to sort through those proposals and figure out which ones are viable, both in terms of the revenue and in terms of the votes down here. We're still early in that process.
And anything on the House side? I know Representative Fitzgibbon last week, you sort of seemed to suggest that we weren't going to be looking at revenue. Is that still?
I think any broad-based increase to our major taxes or Revenue Act taxes is unlikely, but the governor did propose ending 3 tax exemptions. I think those are all worthy of our consideration, as well as Senator Robinson's tobacco tax bill. So I don't think that revenue increases are going to constitute the largest part of our budget solution, but there are some that are, we should be diligent in reviewing tax exemptions at all times, and those 3 are ones that the governor identified as priorities, and we will take those seriously.
Republican leadership is claiming that Democrats aren't focused on affordability. What's your response to that claim?
Well, that's not true. I guess is what I would say. I mean, I think we have a number of pieces of legislation that we are pursuing to try and address affordability. I mean, when you look at the housing, many of the pieces of housing legislation that we have done and are continuing to do on permitting and things like that will help in that regard. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that tariffs for Washington State, like if you just look at like large vehicles, trucks, tariffs are projected to eat up 25% of the costs of like buying a vehicle, 10% increase for lumber, things like that that are related to tariffs in the most trade-dependent state in the country. So there are limited things that we can do, but we are trying to work in all of the spaces that we can. For example, I mentioned at the outset the preventative care bill to make sure that people don't get saddled with co-pays on preventative care and that we protect that. So there's a whole bunch of spaces where we're working and doing work. I think that maybe the differences are, one of the differences is that we're trying to do things that practically will reduce costs for Washingtonians in a way that we can do it in a limited budget situation that we're in, and not pretending that the federal government is having no effect in this state, which is just not. They're having the biggest effect on costs in the state. So we've got to figure out what we can do to do good work.
And affordability is a huge priority for the Senate Democrats, and we have had multiple bills on this issue. I think it was yesterday the Law and Justice Committee had a bill on interest rates on medical debt. We know that medical debt is one of the things that causes people to go into bankruptcy. It's one of the causes of homelessness. And medical debt is not something where they're going out and buying luxury goods. It's a need they have that comes up. And we heard testimony from people diagnosed with cancer who are in such severe medical debt. That's all about affordability. A lot of the affordability challenges are health care and housing. And as the Speaker said, this is all driven by Trump. We didn't have to have this affordability crisis that's made so much worse by what he has been doing. Just today, before I came here, I was testifying in the Healthcare Committee in providing options for our public hospitals, because we know that they're going to be strapped. And people have to go there because who else is going to provide them care? Giving them tools so they can provide more care to individuals, have more agreements with other public hospitals so that we don't have people getting sicker and sicker. And this is to help all Washingtonians across the state. And so affordability means you have to have practical bills. It's not just talking about this tax and that tax, because that's not the way real life works. You have to really pay attention to what are the cost drivers for families. And it's healthcare, housing, childcare.
Representative Scott's HB 2100 bill, this is the payroll tax proposal, scheduled for hearing on Thursday, committee hearing. There's a Senate companion. Is there any scenario where this type of tax ends up going to the governor's desk this year, or is this more getting the conversation started?
Well, I mean, I think that I think it's very early to tell what's going to go to the governor's desk, but I would say it's important for ideas that members bring forward to start to get some discussion and some exposure. I think it's pretty unlikely that bill as it is now would make it to the governor's desk. But again, hearings are what starts the dialogue going. And we'll see. I think the thinking has been really that the millionaire's income tax bill does the work of moving us toward better progressivity. It kind of is the larger revenue bill that does that for us. So there will be a lot of ideas that are talked about in hearings to help members be able to make comparisons and things like that. So I think it's good that it's got a hearing. We'll see where things go from there.
We are in the process of a caucus conversation about the longer-term tax structure problem that we have in the state. And, I don't want to limit where people can go in terms of that conversation. I will say that when we came last session, some form of payroll tax and expansion statewide of the something like the Seattle Jumpstart was one of the principal ideas that we started with in the Senate. And as the conversation happened over the course of the first couple months of 2025, I think there developed a pretty strong consensus in our caucus that was not the place to look for money. So, I think people keep an open mind, and we haven't made any definitive statements, but I don't think that it's likely that the companion is going to get heard in the Senate.
Senator Braun has introduced a bill for accountability with public funds and making sure, especially given the budget picture that we're in, that we are making sure that that there isn't self-dealing in some of the stuff that's been revealed, like in the Tacoma Urban League, Seattle Urban League, that the AG's office is investigating. And then Rep. Couture has a similar bill for, making sure that the NGOs are making proper use of those tax dollars. Are there room for your leadership to consider either of those bills?
I haven't seen Senator Braun's bill, but Senator Braun is generally a very thoughtful partner, and we enjoy collaborating with him. I'm happy to take a look at it.
Yeah, I haven't seen the House bills. I haven't seen the House bill either. So always willing to kind of talk about that and what works. I would note, I do think that it's very important that Washingtonians know that state government is vigilant with their dollars, and and that the state is getting what they're paying for. So I think that that's always the preeminent look. We've luckily been a state, and I guess it's because of the way that we're set up, has instances of fraud have been very limited. And in fact, we've actually, we just had a case where ESD identified an entire company in Pasco that was filing for state benefits fraudulently and identified those early. So we have really good systems in the state set up. Always happy to look at bills that improve those systems for Washingtonians.
Jenkins, there's a Senate bill that would allow unincorporated areas of Pierce County to potentially incorporate more easily, such as Parkland and Spanaway. Given that you're coming from Tacoma, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on such a proposal.
Sorry to say, Simone, but I don't pay that much attention to Senate bills until they come over to the House, because I have like 1,000 of them. Then I have to pay attention in the House. I think I have heard from at least one county council member who was interested in this. I think it was mostly focused on South Hill in Puyallup. But I haven't seen the details of the bill. I don't know how it would operate, so I don't think I have much to say yet. If it comes over, we'll take a look at it.
You mentioned the law enforcement masking bill will likely come up for a floor vote in the Senate next week. Are there any other high-profile, significant bills either anyone would flag as expected to come up for early floor votes as floor action ramps up here in the days ahead?
I think we're probably expecting that the most controversial thing on our calendar for tomorrow will be Senator Valdez's bill about firearms in sensitive places. So that is Parks. Senator Dingro probably had that bill in her committee. So, you know, other than that, it's a little premature to know exactly what's going to get pulled out of rules tomorrow.
And since you mentioned high profile, not controversial, I would like to make sure our victim bills are made high profile, specifically Senator Tawana Noble's bill on testimony of children, which is really a mechanism to make sure we are providing additional protections for vulnerable survivors who can testify in court, and Senator Orwell's bill on really taking a look again at sexual assault survivors and fabricated images. So not controversial, but definitely high profile, which is up to you guys to make it more high profile. But I really want to make sure that everyone here understands that in this Washington, we continue to protect survivors. And I'm very proud of the work that both of them are doing in that regard.
How about the BAC 05? Is that?
I'll keep working on it. I really think we should have a .05 standard, but that one is always a tricky vote count because it's definitely not a partisan issue. So I know every year I feel people in support of that bill grows, and I know the House had a hearing on it. So maybe this is the year, I don't know.
Senator Levick let me know that there is some more Republican support this year, so I would love to see us get there.
How about on the House side? Any exciting floor votes coming up in the coming days here we should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, we have twice as many members on both sides of the aisle, right? So there's just a lot of bills in volume-wise that we're managing. So this last week we had all bipartisan bills, not very many, but just enough to get the dust kind of knocked off. We're going to do the same thing this week. But as we start to see what is still in rules that we would have liked to take up last year, we're having conversations with those prime sponsors, just kind of identify which chamber may be leading on those before we start planning real intense floor action. So I've been in communication with some of the chairs in our caucus to make sure they're communicating and that we have a lay of the land before the end of this week about what our more contentious bills will be like before we get to the floor next week.
A great deal of our work is not the, as you say, high-profile bills, right? You know, we passed a bill, I think unanimously maybe not unanimously, but from Representative Clicker allowing corner stores in residential areas last week. There's lots of bills that don't divide us sharply along partisan lines that I think are important parts of our work. And that's what we've started with this session.
Yeah, the first bill we passed was a Republican bill that folks thought was a good idea, and that's how we started our business here.
I think traditionally bipartisan bills are anywhere from 92% to 96%. And so while we have controversial bills, I feel we don't really talk a lot about how much actual cooperation and bipartisanship we actually have.
Anyone else? Thank you.